All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good Erev Shabbos, post Lag BaOmer. Beautiful day. Enjoy it, and hope everything should go well. Everyone should be healthy. Have a wonderful Shabbos ahead. We're going to learn a Rashi together from the sixth Aliyah, Parshas Behar. We've been talking about many circumstances in the Parsha of a person who's impoverished. The Parsha begins, of course, with the broad introduction at the very beginning of the Parsha. It's a short Parsha. Beginning of the Parsha with Shemitah and Yovel, a description of the count of the years and of the cycles. And then general prohibition about not taking interest from people, not cheating people. We talked about that on Monday. And then going to the third Aliyah, a little bit more about Shemitah. And then into the fourth Aliyah, we talked about yesterday, when a person is impoverished and they're forced to sell their land, their ancestral land. Wednesday. And then Thursday, yesterday, we talked further about other situations where a person is in financial trouble and we need to help them, we need to raise them up. Person sells their home, different kinds of homes and lands that are sold, when they come back, when they're able to be redeemed. That's the details of the Parsha. When you get to the sixth Aliyah, we have yet another Chiyamuch. There's 3 or 4 of them in the Parsha. Chiyamuch Achicha is when your friend, your brother, your acquaintance becomes impoverished. Here's what happens. So one of those chiyamuchs was when a person becomes impoverished, they have to sell their ancestral land, and then what happens in terms of the process of the redemption of this land. This chiyamuch at the end of the parsha is when a person not only needs to sell their land, but they need to sell themselves into slavery or servitude in order to be able to survive and in order to pay back their debt. So this is what we call the Eved Ivri, the Jewish slave topic or piece of the Torah here in terms of the guidance of how to treat that situation. This is distinct from the Eved Knani when you have a non-Jewish slave. Also a fascinating sugya, fascinating topic. How we treat a person who is in servitude to us who's not Jewish, how they accept partially the mitzvahs of the Torah, some mitzvahs when they live with us, what happens when they're released, what happens if they want to be fully Jewish, whole interesting scenario over there. But in this case, we're talking about Eved Ivri, Jewish person who sells themselves into slavery or servitude to another Jew. And these couple of psukim, which frame the responsibility of the new owner of this slave, the Eved Ivri, in terms of framing their behavior, really helps to shape our whole image of what the concept of Eved Ivri is all about. When a person becomes impoverished next to you and they sell themselves to you, Lo sa'avod bo avodas aved. Principle number 1 is, despite the fact that they're called an Eved, they're called a slave, you bought them, you purchased them in some way. Nonetheless, the Torah's view of slavery is that you don't own the person and you don't own the right to treat them like a slave. Fascinating concept. Don't work them avodas aved. Don't work them with the work of a slave. Avoda shel genai, Rashi says. What is avodas aved? The work of a slave. It's demeaning work. It's work that's embarrassing. It's work that demotes them in terms of their status and their feeling about themselves. It's disgraceful work. That's not something you're able to load onto them or to require of them. What's an example? Before we get to the examples. You're not allowed to work them in the type of work that is demeaning, that is disgraceful, or that makes it recognizable that they're an Eved. It has to be something more tsanua, something more discreet. Two examples of things you're not allowed to require Eved Ivri to do. You're not allowed to require them to carry your vessels into the bathhouse. You can't say to them, listen, I'm going to the bathhouse, you carry my towel and you follow behind me and then hand it to me when I come out of the bathhouse. That's demeaning, that's disgraceful. That's not something that's appropriate to put on your Eved Ivri. Or tell them to put on your shoes, right? You sit back in a nice chair and have them boot up your boots and lace them up and tie them. That's not appropriate behavior for an Eved Ivri. So what should be the behavior? What should be the approach? You're not allowed to treat them or disgrace them with the behaviors of a slave. So how do you think of them? How do you treat them? What is this relationship like? If it's not really like you've purchased them, like you own them, like you can do whatever you want to them, so what is the relationship like? The Torah gives the flip side. Kisachir kisoshav iye imach. They're supposed to be treated like a sachir or a toshav, like a person who dwells in your midst, or a person who is hired, like a worker. What kind of relationship is that like? What examples would fall under that broad rubric or category? Avodas karka, meleches omanus, kishar sechirim hisnaheg bo. Treat them like every other hired worker. You can force them, ask them, require them to work the land, to work vessels, to do blacksmith work, tailoring work. Anything you would hire someone to do, you're allowed to let them do. Why? Because then it's not nikar ba ke'eved. It's not recognizable that you're treating them like a slave. Someone would look at them and say, oh, you must have hired them to do some work. All of the structure here is to prevent a hierarchy between the master and the eved of being one that is demeaning to the person, to the human being, more than it has to be, and to preserve the honor and dignity of the person in the tzibur, in the community. No one should look upon and say, that's a slave. He's working as a slave. No, it's not that kind of thing. They should look at them and not really be able to recognize, was that person impoverished and sold themselves as an Eved Ivri, or did that person just hire that man or that woman in order to work for them in the way that other workers work? It's just that in this case, they're not paying them, right? No one would know that. That would be something more tsenua, more modest, more hidden. The whole process here is so respectful of the human being, so respectful of the dignity of the human being. We never want to rob someone of their dignity, even when at the lowest point in their life, they have to sell themselves into servitude. We don't want them to be demeaned any further than they have to be. It's a beautiful couple of psukim that really capture the essence of what an Eved Ivri is and what it isn't, and more importantly, the general view of the Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu about the nature of a human being. Thank you so much, everybody, and I hope you have a great Shabbos ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi, you too, and everybody.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.